Hi dear students, welcome to Kavitha's NEET classes. In this lecture, we shall discuss a topic, cell cycle. Whether it is a unicellular organism or a multicellular organism, every cell undergoes cell division. There are two important characteristics of every cell, that is cell growth and cell division. And it is because of these characteristics of cell growth and cell division that a single cell is capable of giving rise to a huge organism composed of several cells. Take the example of us human beings. A sperm fertilizes an ovum to give rise to a single cell called zygote. The zygote undergoes repeated cell division leading to the formation of an embryo, which further undergoes again divisions giving rise to a fetus, baby and so on. So, cell growth and cell division are very essential for growth of an organism. So, how is it that a single cell can give rise to a huge population of cells? One cell divides into two. Say, this is the parent cell. It divides into two daughter cells. Now, these daughter cells further undergo division, giving rise to four cells. So, each newly formed cell becomes a parent cell and it gives rise to two daughter cells. Those daughter cells again become parent cells and they give rise to daughter cells again. So this process of cell growth and cell division continues several times to give rise to huge population of cells, which leads to organisms, right? Now, what is it that happens in the cell? That is, what are the stages or what are the steps that occur in this cell that enables it to grow, become huge, almost double its size, and then divide into two daughter cells. So, the set of events that occur in the parent cell for it to grow in size and to divide into two daughter cells is called as cell cycle. Okay, in simple terms, understand, if a cell has to divide, it has to undergo a lot of processes within itself. It has to replicate its DNA, it has to increase its size, it has to synthesize organelles. So all of these activities or events which are happening within the parent cell so that it is finally prepared to divide into two. So what are those events? Those events or stages or steps is what we call it as cell cycle. So we will be discussing in depth about this in this lecture. So, cells divide into new daughter cells through a series of events that take place in steps. The products formed in each round replicate the process for the next round. And a cell cycle is thus a sequence of events that a cell goes through as it grows and divides to produce new cells. Hence, it is also called as the life cycle of the cell. So, for a cell to be able to divide and produce two daughter cells, what are all the stages, what are all the steps it goes through? So, how it grows, what are the activities which happen during the growth phase? What are the activities which happens during the synthesis phase where the replication of DNA happens? So, all these stages and all these steps put together that a cell has to undergo for its division into two daughter cells is called as cell cycle. Hence, we also call it as the life cycle of the cell. So, cell cycle can also be called as life cycle of the cell. We discuss the various stages of the cell cycle. It's better if you can know a little bit about haploid cells and diploid cells. So, we have two kinds of cells in our body, isn't it? We have the somatic cells and we have the gametes or the gametic cells, isn't it? So somatic cells are nothing but the body cells. And gametic cells are reproductive cells. So what are the gametic cells in us? So in males, the gametic cells are sperm, isn't it? In females, the gametic cell is ovum or ova, right? So these gametic cells are haploid in nature. What do we mean by haploid? That is, they have a single set of chromosome, okay, which we represent by a small n in brackets. Did you understand what we mean by haploid? Haploid means they have a single set of chromosome. Now coming back to the somatic cells, the somatic cells are body cells. They are present throughout our body and these cells are diploid in nature. Diploid means they have two sets of chromosome which we represent by 2n. What do we mean by diploidy? That is, the body cells have two sets of chromosomes, one set coming from the father and one set coming from the mother. Got it? So we are speaking with respect to human beings here. So diploid means two set of chromosome, one set coming from the father and one set coming from the mother. So what will be the total number of chromosomes here? It will be 46 chromosomes. Whereas what is the total number of chromosomes in gametic cells? It is 23 chromosomes. That is, they have only a single set of chromosomes. This understanding will be helpful for you to understand the lecture further. So somatic cells are diploid in nature, that is they have two sets of chromosome, and gametic cells or the sex cells or the gametes as we call it are haploid in nature, that is they have a single set of chromosome. During the division of a cell, DNA replication and cell growth happens. So the processes of cell division, DNA replication and cell growth has to happen in a coordinated manner, in a proper manner, so that there is correct division of the cell organelles and also the genetic material between two daughter cells. And this sequence of events which make sure that the cell duplicates its genome, synthesizes the other constituents of the cell and eventually gives an equal proportion of the constituents to both the daughter cells is called as cell cycle. So we have a parent cell which is dividing and giving rise to two daughter cells. Now if it has to give equal quantities of genetic material and other cellular constituents to each of them, then this cell has to grow in size and it also has to make twice the amount of genetic material that it already has. So this process of cell growth, replication of DNA and the division of the parent cell into two daughter cells, making sure that both the daughter cells are getting equal amount of genetic material and other cell constituents, has to be in a coordinated manner, and this is called as the cell cycle. Events happening in a cell cycle are genetically controlled. Okay, so whatever events that are happening during a cell cycle, so what are the activities which happen during the cell cycle? The growth of the cell, the replication of the DNA and also the cell division. These are the three important prime activities which happen during the cell cycle. All these three happen in a coordinated manner and it is controlled genetically. So now you might ask, okay, if that is the case, how long does it take for one cell to divide into two daughter cells? So this again varies from organism to organism. So if you take the example of yeast, if you have one cell of yeast, within 90 minutes, it will give rise to two daughter yeast cells. That is 1 hour 30 minutes or 90 minutes. So with one yeast cell, you can get two yeast daughter cells within a span of 90 minutes. Whereas in human beings, the duration is 24 hours. So every single cell in our body, if it has to divide into two daughter cells, it takes 24 hours. And even among that, the interphase. Okay, I'll be discussing about interphase shortly. The interphase is the longest phase, which takes around 95% of the time. Okay, whereas the actual cell division, which is called as the M phase, just takes around 1 hour only. Okay, I'll be discussing that shortly now. The cell cycle. I already told you what is the cell cycle. The growth of the cell, the replication of the DNA, and the cell division. All of these occur in a coordinated manner so that the parent cell is capable of dividing into two daughter cells and giving equal quantities of genetic material and other cellular components to both the daughter cells. So the cell cycle has different phases. There are two important phases of cell cycle. First one is the interphase and second one is the M phase. So here you can see in this picture, this entire circle from here to here, this is the interphase, whereas this is the M phase or the mitotic phase. So the cell cycle can be divided into two phases. One is the interphase and the second one is the M phase, or it is also called as the mitosis phase. So what is the interphase? Initially during your lower classes in primary or middle school, you must have been taught that interphase is the resting stage of the cell, isn't it? Actually, that is not true. Interphase is the phase where the cell is actively preparing itself for the actual cell division, which happens during the M phase. Got it? So just like how you are preparing for the examination, isn't it? The examination happens just for 3 hours at the end of the academic year. But for that 3-hour examination, you are preparing, you are putting in efforts for one entire year. You are reading, you are revising, you are solving questions. So you are making so much of preparation for that one exam which you are going to take up for 3 hours on the day of the examination, isn't it? At the end of the academic year. So this entire stage where you are preparing for the exam can be considered as interphase, whereas the day of examination where you exactly take the examination for 3 hours, that can be considered as mitosis or mitotic phase or the M phase, mitosis phase. Okay, this is just for your understanding. Please do not take real meanings for this. Okay, so the cell cycle can be divided into interphase and M phase. Interphase is the phase where the cell is actively preparing for the cell division. So it is during the interphase that the cell will grow, the replication of the DNA happens, the synthesis of the histone proteins, and once again growth. All these activities happen during the interphase stage. Whereas the M phase or the mitosis phase, this stage is the one where actual cell division happens. So this M phase hardly takes around 1 hour. Okay, so I told you in human beings, the duration of cell cycle is 24 hours. So out of this 24 hours, just 1 hour goes into the actual cell division, whereas the rest of the time goes into interphase, that is for the cell to prepare for cell division. Okay, further interphase can be divided into G1 phase, S phase and G2 phase. Interphase. So I told you, interphase is not a resting stage. Interphase is not a resting stage of the cell. In fact, it is a active stage. In this stage, the cell is metabolically active. So the cell grows, it doubles in size, the replication of the DNA happens. Okay, all these activities are happening during the interphase. So interphase is the duration between one M phase to the next M phase. So when a cell enters a newly formed cell, first it enters into interphase, then go through M phase, and then again it go through interphase. So say there is a cell, first it goes through interphase, then it goes through mitosis phase, and then it gives rise to two daughter cells. Okay, now these two daughter cells will again go through interphase, then they will again go through mitosis phase, and they will give rise to two daughter cells each. I hope you understood, right? So one cell goes through entire cycle of cell division including interphase and M phase, and it gives rise to two daughter cells. And these two daughter cells again go through interphase and M phase to give rise to two daughter cells each. And this cycle continues. Okay, so interphase is the time lapse between the two successive phases of cell division. It is during this interphase stage that the cell prepares for the cell division. It prepares for cell division, it grows, and also DNA replication takes place during the interphase stage. And interphase can be further divided into three different stages of G1 phase, S phase and G2 phase. I already told you this entire stretch of the cell cycle is interphase. Whereas only this stretch marked in yellow, this is the M phase or the mitosis phase where the exact cell division happens. So this entire interphase can be further divided into three different stages, which is G1, S and G2. First, let's discuss G1 phase. So here G stands for growth, right? So G1 phase is also called as gap phase also. You can call it as G1 phase or gap phase. So it is the gap between previous mitosis and the DNA replication of the next cycle. So this region here, okay, this part of interphase is G1 phase. So what happens during the G1 phase? The G1 phase is the longest phase of interphase. So under G1, under interphase we have G1, S and G2. Three different phases are there under interphase. Out of that, G1 is the longest phase. So this can also be asked as a question in your examination. So G1 is the longest phase during which cell actually grows. So the cell is metabolically active and it grows and it becomes twice the size. However, it does not replicate its DNA. This is very, very important and it has been asked in your previous year questions many times. Okay, so please do not forget this. Replication of DNA does not happen in the G1 phase. Replication of DNA happens in the S phase, which is called as a synthesis phase. So keep this in mind. And which is the longest phase? The longest phase is G1. Okay, here though the cell is metabolically active and it is continuously growing, the replication of DNA does not happen in G1. Then a large number of nucleotides, amino acids, synthesis of histone proteins, all of these also occur during the G1 phase. So now, please do not expect questions, very simple questions. So if asked a question, what are the different stages of interphase? Anybody can answer the question. Under options, if you have G1, S and G2, yes, anybody can mark. Whereas your examiner will not make such easy questions. If he wants to make the questions tough, he will tend to pick up few hints here and there which usually students ignore. Say for example, the histone proteins. Many students might just ignore this thinking, okay, it is not that much important. Let me just remember that G1 is the phase during which the growth of the cell occurs. However, the replication of DNA does not occur and they will ignore this point altogether, that is the synthesis of the histone proteins. However, this itself has been asked, particularly in one year in NEET examination, they have asked the synthesis of the histone proteins occurs in which phase of cell cycle, G1, S2, G1, S, G2 or M phase. Okay, then you will get confused whether it is in G1 or S or G2. So please give attention to detail while you're preparing for your examination. When you are appearing for a competitive examination, it becomes all the more important. Okay, so do not ignore such important details here and there. Fine. The second stage of interphase. Okay, the second stage of interphase, that is here. This region of the interphase marked in green is the S phase. S phase is also called as synthesis phase. So S phase or the synthesis phase, the most important activity which happens in this phase is replication of DNA or DNA replication. So here DNA replication is very, very important, and many times it has been asked in the examination asking in which stage of the cell cycle does DNA replication happen? G1, S, G2, M phase. So it is only in S phase that replication of DNA occurs, and not in G1, not in G2, not in M phase. Okay, so please do not get confused. So it is the S phase during which DNA replication happens, and the DNA content of the cell doubles over here. So whatever genetic material DNA that is present, it becomes twice. However, the chromosome number remains the same. So this is also a very important question asked in previous years. Keep this in mind. Though the quantity of DNA becomes twice, okay, say you have this much of DNA in the cell, after the S phase you will have twice the amount of that DNA. However, the chromosome number is still the same. The chromosome number does not become twice. Okay, please keep this point. This is very important. Keep this point in mind. So though the genetic material DNA, the amount of DNA becomes twice, the chromosome number still remains the same. Say for example, when the DNA, suppose the DNA that is present in the cell initially is 2C, after S phase it will become 4C. You have questions like this also. So your examiner will give a question. So if the initial amount of DNA before the cell is entering S phase is 2C, what will be the amount of DNA after it is finishing the S phase? And they will give you options, or they will give you options like after the S phase the number of chromosomes will remain the same, the number of chromosomes will become double, okay, and during the S phase it is the DNA replication which happens, and the content of the DNA doubles. So which among this is the right answer option? Or they might ask you a question like, in the S phase what are the activities which take place? So first option will be DNA replication, and second option will be the DNA content of the cell doubles, and third option will be the chromosome number remains the same, and the fourth option will be the chromosome number becomes double. So now they will ask you, choose the wrong option among this. Choose a point which does not happen during S phase. So what does not happen? The number of chromosomes does not increase, it remains the same. So fourth option will be the right option, whereas the other three, that is DNA replication and the content of DNA doubles and chromosome number remains the same, all of these are the right answer options. Okay, fine. So if initial amount of DNA is 2C, okay, after the S phase it will become 4C. Okay, if the cell had diploid or 2n number of chromosomes at G1, even after S phase the number of chromosomes still remains 2n. This is what I told you. The chromosome number does not change. Only the quantity of DNA becomes double. However, the chromosome number still remains the same. And in animal cells, the S phase, during the S phase, the DNA replication begins in the nucleus. Okay, and the centriole duplicates in the cytoplasm. So this has also been asked as a question earlier. So in which stage of cell cycle can you find the duplication of the centriole happening? Is it in G1, S, G2? It is in S phase. So please do not ignore such details which most of the students tend to ignore and they get confused in the examination. So it is during the S phase that the DNA replication happens in the nucleus and the duplication of the centrioles happen in the cytoplasm. Now moving on to the third phase of interphase, that is G2. So first one is G1, second one is S, and the third phase is the G2, which also stands for growth 2 phase, right? Or you can also call it as gap 2 phase. So what happens during this phase? Again, during this phase, the cell continues to grow and prepare for the cell division, and protein synthesis also occurs during this stage. Okay, so in the first stage also, in G1 also, it is predominantly growth, and in the S phase, the primary function is DNA replication, and G2, again there is growth of the cell and it is preparing itself for the M phase, which is the cell division phase. So there are many cells in our human body which do not divide. So what happens to such cells? Say for example, the heart cells. Heart cells usually do not divide. Very rarely or very occasionally they divide in occasions such as if there is a injured, suppose some cells have got injured, then they have to replace new cells in that region, then the heart cells will divide. Or suppose some cells are dead. Only in those circumstances when there's an injury or when there's a death of a cell, the heart cells will divide. However, normally the heart cells do not divide. So what will happen to these cells if they do not divide? How do they stop? How is the cell division arrested? So what happens is these cells do not further divide and they will exit the G1 phase to enter an inactive stage called as the G0 or the quiescent stage of the cell. So this is also very important from your examination point of view. So we have various cells in our body which do not keep dividing repeatedly. They have sufficient amount of cells, they will not divide any further. Okay, so one such example is the heart cell. So unless there is an injury or unless there is a death of a cell, they will not divide. So these cells, they will stop once they exit the G1 phase. They enter into a phase called as G0. So G0 is an inactive stage. It is a quiescent stage of the cell where they do not undergo any further cell division or they do not enter into the cell cycle anymore. Got it? Did you understand G0 stage? Then in animals, the mitotic cell division, you can see only in the somatic cells, isn't it? So mitosis happens only in somatic cells, whereas in gametic cells, meiosis happens. And mitosis is called as equational cell division and meiosis is called as reductional cell division. Next, moving on to the last stage of the cell cycle, which is M phase. So this entire was interphase and this part of the cell cycle is M phase or the mitosis phase, which is the actual phase where the cell divides. So here you will have various stages of mitosis like prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, where majorly division of the nucleus occurs. So division of the nucleus is called as karyokinesis. Karyon means nuclei or nucleus. So karyokinesis means division of the nucleus. Then it is followed by cytokinesis. Cyto means cytoplasm. Okay, cyto means cytoplasm. So division of the cytoplasm is called as cytokinesis. So overall, during the M phase, what happens is the cell is going into the actual phase of cell division, where it goes through stages of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, during which division of the nucleus occur, and then finally it will be followed by the stage of cytokinesis, during which division of the cytoplasm occurs. So this completes one cycle. So after cytokinesis, the parent cell would have got divided into two daughter cells. Got it? So initially one cell goes through one entire cell cycle, which includes G1, S, G2 and M phase. So after it goes through all of those phases, it will give rise to two daughter cells, and these daughter cells again goes through all the events of the cell cycle and gives rise to two daughter cells. Each one of them give rise to two daughter cells again. So this keeps happening. Okay. So I hope you understood this topic, cell cycle, properly. I will also be discussing the questions which have been asked from the cell cycle topic in the previous year NEET examinations in the next lecture. So until I meet you in the next lecture, take care, and you can also connect with me on the social media. Until then, take care. Have a good day.